It is easy to dismiss the rocket-building, pool-hall junkie Marvel villain with the absurd helmet known as 8-Ball, but I'm looking to change that perception on this episode of Lesser Evils. 8-Ball's first full appearance was in Sleepwalker No. 2 that came out in 1991. Jeff Haggis was a designer of missile propulsion systems for an unnamed defense contractor. He was also a pretty good pool player, which he did to blow off steam after a hard day's work. That was until the company fired Jeff over the large debts he'd built up gambling on pool matches. They were afraid he would sell work secrets to pay back the debts, despite them not having any proof. Unlike most understandably disgruntled employees who would just go looking for a new job, Jeff said fuck the establishment and put his knowledge of both pool and propulsion systems toward developing a superpowered Q-stick, because every supervillain has to have their shtick. Thinking this was the answer to his problem, Jeff became 8-Ball and started a career as a costume criminal. 8-Ball seemed to be pretty successful, if the television and newspapers were to be believed. It seems the first speed bump in his criminal career was running into the fledgling superhero Sleepwalker, who seems to be as uninteresting to Marvel as actual sleepwalking. During this first encounter, 8-Ball reveals his face to Sleepwalker and even explains his origin like a cocky little shit, before attempting to crush the hero with a chunk of masonry. Although Sleepwalker survives and the robbery is stopped, 8-Ball and his gang get away. Sleepwalker intercepts 8-Ball again while the villain attempts to steal an outrageously expensive billiards trophy. After a short fight, 8-Ball captures Sleepwalker, then leaves the poor bastard to die in a giant exploding death trap like a true villain. Sometime later, Hobgoblin and 8-Ball make a bet to see which of them could really kill Sleepwalker, because he didn't actually die in the explosion, it was his book after all. After learning the Sleepwalker they were fighting was the wrong guy, 8-Ball has no trouble dropping the bet and leaving the not Sleepwalker to bleed out after Hobgoblin cuts the hero's throat. Because it's hard being a new superhero. If sales don't get you, the villains will. During these encounters in the Sleepwalker book, we get to see 8-Ball's gadgets and meet the henchmen he ditches after their first appearance. 8-Ball wears a bulletproof metal helmet shaped like a giant 8-Ball. I found nothing showing what the inside of the helmet contains, whether it's full of cool tech or just empty space. It's also never been revealed how you see out of the helmet. Even the minions had open faces on their helmets. I would like to see Marvel do one of their old school schematics for the helmet, like they did with the Punisher's battle van. 8-Ball and his men used ball bombs, which were just pool ball shaped explosives that detonated on impact. Don't know what more I should say about a weapon whose name most grade school boys would giggle at. Only slightly less silly are the pool ball shaped drones 8-Ball uses to search for Sleepwalker that aren't lucky enough to get a name to make fun of. We get to see his neat teen transport, dubbed the Hover Rack, that is never seen again after he ditches the gang. I mean, they couldn't have been that great in the first place if they agreed to wear those silly outfits while getting bossed around by a guy with a pool ball for a head. Then there are the floating devices 8-Ball rode alone that were shaped like, you guessed it, giant 8-Balls. I'd like to know how he stayed on the damn things with no foothold. And I don't know how expensive they were, but 8-Ball blows up many of them just to celebrate his successful robbery and to try to kill Sleepwalker. Finally, let's look at 8-Ball's Super Q, which can magnify the force of its strike over 1,000-fold. During the 3 encounters 8-Ball has with Sleepwalker, we see him knock a car through a bank window, launch an entire phone booth at Sleepwalker, knock a fire hydrant from its base hard enough to shatter a large piece of concrete, fire a sewer lid with enough force to cut a cop car in half, launch people into the air like missiles, knock over a water tower. I can go on, but in summary, I just think it's a really unique weapon. After some background appearances, 8-Ball shows up again in She-Hulk No. 5 that came out in 2004. He is shown to be incarcerated along with many other supervillains in a brand new super prison called the Big House. Using Pym particles, the villains are shrunk down to only a few inches, then placed in neatly stackable prison cells. After a plan hatched by the Mad Thinker works, 8-Ball and several other villains become even smaller so they can escape the prison on the back of She-Hulk's hand. The plan works and the villains escape the prison, but then must get past She-Hulk. Things don't end up well for 8-Ball as She-Hulk bounces him like a super ball around the room, taking out 2 other tiny villains, and all of them are recaptured. 2 years later, in Daughters of the Dragon No. 1, 8-Ball is out of jail and continuing his criminal career. Alongside other villains, he performs a robbery on the home of what he thinks is just a famous publisher. It's a fearsome team of villains, consisting of Whirlwind the Stalker, Humbug the Insect Whisperer, and the saddest Mr. Freeze knockoff you've ever seen, Freezer Burned. Although the heist is successful, the group doesn't notice the cute teddy bear with a camera inside that is secretly recording them. This really pisses off the homeowner, a badass woman named Cecilia Riccadonna, who quickly puts out hits on each of the villains. Not knowing their lives were in danger, the gang only begin to realize something is wrong when Freezerburn doesn't show for a meeting. Then the fence they were looking to sell the goods to refuses to touch the items. For 8-Ball, his day gets worse when he visits his sick grandmother in his civvies and gets picked up for outstanding warrants by the Daughters of the Dragon, Misty Knight and Colleen Wing. After learning that Freezerburn had been murdered because he had such a bright future ahead of him, 8-Ball has a short breakdown before a motherfucking RPG slams into the car the trio are riding in. The ladies can do nothing as 8-Ball is killed by the first explosion, and then his body completely incinerated after the car itself blows up. That is how Jeff Haggis, the first 8-Ball, died. To my amazement, a second 8-Ball popped up a few years later in the pages of Amazing Spider-Man. Although he has changed the suit up, this new 8-Ball is completely unspectacular and makes just the one appearance getting his ass whooped by Spider-Man. His name is never revealed and no one cared. The third, also unidentified 8-Ball appears to have purchased the original 8-Ball's gear from Robert Kingsley, the first hobgoblin, often imitated and sometimes duplicated, who had been selling supervillain franchises to would-be supercriminals. This 8-Ball fought alongside Kingsley while he warred against Norman Osborn and his goblin army. After Kingsley is seemingly choked to death by Osborn, 8-Ball and the other franchise villains join up with the Goblin Army. When the Green Goblin is finally taken down and his Goblin Army mostly disbanded, 8-Ball takes time to talk shit with a down-and-out Electro before joining up with the vengeful Black Cat when she is recruiting for her gang. In between stints with the Black Cat's gang, this 8-Ball joins a new incarnation of the Sinister Six led by one of Spider-Man's goofiest villains, Swarm. Although the group seems to perform the robbery well, they do terrible when faced with Spider-Man and his class of X-Men students. 8-Ball himself is turned against his team by the telepathic mutant brain in a jar No Girl. Fuck, I love comics. Except for an appearance biting the hand that fed him, where 8-Ball and other villains attacked Hobgoblin and his Hob heroes, nothing else has been heard from the third 8-Ball. So why do I think 8-Ball is worth taking a look at? First off, the original 8-Ball seemed to be pretty successful at being a costumed criminal when other villains are getting taken down left and right by New York's numerous superheroes. He made enough money to deal with his debt and afford all the crazy pool-themed tech, as well as wasting many perfectly good giant hovering 8-Balls which had to be expensive. Next, 8-Ball acted like a professional and didn't take things personally when fighting with Sleepwalker. He was ready to kill Sleepwalker each time he fought the hero. Once fired from their job, most ex-employees turned supervillains would have turned around and attacked their former employers, but not Haggis. He set his sights on a goal, and that was making his fortune while wearing a giant 8-Ball on his head. The original 8-Ball realized that having a gang is for losers, and ditched them to the curb after they didn't do shit in their first encounter with a superhero. I also don't think it's a stretch to assume he would have wanted to switch to this giant hover 8-Ball and not have to give one to each of those goons. Finally, 8-Ball seemed like a fun guy to hang out with, especially if you wanted a good game of pool. This is a trait that seemed to have rubbed off on his successors. Maybe in the future, there will be a story that retcons the death of Jeff Haggis, so readers can see him strike fear into the hearts of New Yorkers once again as the real 8-Ball.